The day my water stopped running, I was brushing my teeth and nearly choked on toothpaste. I twisted the faucet again, nothing. I checked the kitchen sink, the shower, even the hose outside.
Dry.
No warnings, no notice, just silence from every pipe. I stormed outside and caught the tail end of Darla Henderson's leopard print robe disappearing behind her hydrangeas. Chairwoman of the HOA, queen of passive-aggressive notes, and the most entitled woman this side of the county line. Darla. I called out. She froze like a raccoon caught in headlights. You know anything about my water? She turned, clutching her mug like it was a trophy. Walter, she said, drawing out my name like a bad taste. Yes, actually. I had it shut off. I blinked. You what? You've been using excessive amounts, she said, not a hint of shame. The HOA has a duty to enforce responsible utility usage. I warned the board last month that someone was watering their lawn too often. Turns out it was you. I stepped closer, jaw tight. You can't just cut off someone's water, Darla. That's illegal. Oh, please, she waved dismissively. The HOA charter gives us certain emergency powers when it comes to overuse and neighborhood sustainability. No, I said. That's not how any of this works. She took a sip of her coffee and gave me a look like she was doing me a favor. Well, maybe next time you'll think twice before running your sprinklers during a drought. There was no drought. The county had lifted restrictions a week ago after 2 months of steady rain. My lawn looked good because I took care of it, unlike Darla's patchy mess of crabgrass and regret. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just turned around and went back inside. Then I started dialing. First, I called the water company. They confirmed it wasn't them. My account was in perfect standing. Then I asked them to send someone out to inspect the line. By noon, a technician was walking my property with me. He stopped abruptly and pointed at the side of my house. See that lock, he said. That's a third-party lock on your main valve. Someone manually shut this off. Can I remove it? He shook his head. Nope. It's a county issue now. That's tampering with a public utility. That's all I needed. I called the county inspector's office, gave them everything: photos, the technician's report, even Darla's proud little confession. The woman on the line sounded stunned. She admitted it? Loud and proud, I said. Said the HOA gave her authority. There was a pause. Then, we'll send someone out today. By 6 p.m., 2 county officials and a sheriff's deputy were standing on Darla's porch. From across the street, I watched as she opened the door in full HOA regalia, clipboard, pearls, and that permanent look of superiority. She started with her usual tone.
Loud.
Condescending. Confident. Then I saw her expression change. The sheriff pointed at the lock. One of the officials handed her a paper. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on dry land. She looked over at me. I gave her a wave. She didn't wave back. Darla didn't show her face for the rest of the evening. The county officials finished their inspection, took photos of the tampered valve, and left the paperwork with the deputy. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know it wasn't going her way. The next morning, my water was back. The county had removed the unauthorized lock, and the technician returned to ensure everything was operational. I thanked him, offered him a cold bottle of water, and he left shaking his head like he'd seen it all. I figured Darla would lay low for a while. I was wrong. Around noon, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp. Hand-delivered. Inside, a formal-looking letter embossed with the HOA seal, a printed screenshot of my supposed water usage infraction, and a fine for $1,200. I read every word carefully. It accused me of violating Resource Management Clause 14b, a line I'd never seen before despite having scanned the HOA charter front to back when I bought the house. The letter claimed the board had voted to retroactively enforce water conservation penalties and that this was the first and final notice. I walked straight to my filing cabinet, pulled out the original HOA charter, and flipped through the pages. No Clause 14b. Not even a Section 14. It was a fabricated rule. I scanned the document, highlighted the fake clause, and called my friend Caleb, who worked in municipal code enforcement. He wasn't just a paper pusher, he was a details guy. The kind who noticed when someone tried to pass off a zoning memo from 2009 as current law just because they changed the letterhead. Caleb agreed to swing by that afternoon. When he arrived, I handed him the envelope, then poured him some coffee while he read. "This clause doesn't exist," he said, pointing. "And this letter isn't even properly notarized. See that seal? It's not registered with the county. This is a forged regulatory notice. Can we prove it?" He nodded. "Absolutely. I'll file a formal complaint. But you should also get a copy of the HOA's meeting minutes if they claim there was a vote. It has to be documented." I never attended a single HOA meeting in person. Like most residents on the street, I assumed they were glorified coffee clubs with too many rules and not enough actual purpose. But I'd kept every newsletter. I dug through the stack and found the one from last month. It listed the date of the next meeting, and it was scheduled for that evening. Perfect. I arrived early and sat near the front, clipboard in hand. A few folks I recognized from the neighborhood trickled in. Most looked bored. A couple gave me nods. Others avoided eye contact. Darla arrived last, dressed like she was hosting a gala instead of a community meeting. She spotted me and stiffened slightly, but said nothing. The meeting began with the usual monotony. Budget updates, lawn maintenance reminders, an announcement about a new neighborhood watch app no one would download. Then Darla cleared her throat. "We have a matter of enforcement to address," she said, glancing in my direction. "A resident was recently penalized for violating resource sustainability measures. This is an example of the kind of proactive leadership this board provides." "Point of order," I interrupted. Darla blinked. "You're not on the board, Mr. Hale." "I don't have to be. I'm a dues-paying member of this HOA, and I have questions about the enforcement you just mentioned." There was a low murmur. Most people looked surprised. One man in the back actually put down his phone. "I received a fine," I continued, citing a clause that doesn't exist in the governing documents. "I've reviewed the charter. There is no Clause 14b. Darla's jaw tightened. "It was added in an emergency session." "Then where are the minutes from that session?" She hesitated. "They haven't been transcribed yet." "Interesting," I said. I turned to the rest of the room. "Did anyone here attend this emergency session?" No hands went up. Then it wasn't a session. It was Darla acting alone. And she forged an enforcement notice using an unregistered seal. A few people looked her way now, brows furrowed. Someone near the back whispered, and the woman next to him nodded. "This is serious," I said. "Tampering with utilities is already a crime. But now we're talking about forgery, financial coercion, abuse of power under the guise of community governance." Darla tried to regain control. "You're mischaracterizing the situation. The board has discretion." "You're not the board," I said. "You're the chair. That doesn't give you unilateral power to invent rules, shut off services, or issue fines without a vote." The man who had been looking at his phone earlier stood up. "Actually," he said, "I'm on the board, and I didn't vote on any of this." Now the room shifted. 3 other members raised their hands. All denied participating in any emergency vote. One of them, a retired schoolteacher named Linda, looked genuinely irritated. "I've been asking for updated bylaws for months," she said. "Darla keeps saying they're in review. Now I know why." Darla's face flushed. She tried to speak, but her words tangled. "I think it's time we table any further enforcement discussions," I said. "And maybe look into a full audit of the HOA's actions for the last 6 months. Starting with this water situation." Caleb had come with me and was seated in the back, silent the whole time. Now he stood and introduced himself formally. When he mentioned his position with the city's code enforcement division, the room went still. "We've already opened an investigation," he said. "Documents have been submitted. If we find evidence of forgery or misuse of funds, the county may pursue criminal charges." Darla sat down hard. Her clipboard slipped from her lap and hit the floor with a hollow clack. The rest of the meeting was chaos in a good way. People asked questions, demanded transparency, even formed a volunteer committee to review past actions. For the first time in years, the HOA meeting wasn't just a formality. It was a reckoning. As we left, Caleb leaned over. "She's in real trouble," he said. "Falsifying regulatory documents carries serious penalties. And if the water shutoff impacted your property value or caused damage, you could sue." "I'm not interested in suing," I said. "I just want her out." He raised an eyebrow. "Well, you might get both." The next morning, I received a visit from a county investigator. They asked to record a statement and collect the forged documents. I handed everything over, including the HOA letter, the newsletter, and my annotated copy of the bylaws. By the end of the week, Darla was served with a formal notice of investigation. The HOA board, now fully awake, held an emergency vote, a real one this time, and suspended her from all chair duties, pending the outcome. She tried to fight it, claimed bias, harassment, conspiracy. But no one was listening anymore. For once, the neighborhood was paying attention. 3 days after the stormy HOA meeting, a plain white county vehicle pulled up in front of Darla's house. The man who stepped out wore a navy windbreaker with a municipal badge stitched above the pocket. He didn't knock. He walked straight to the side of her house, clipboard in hand, and began taking photographs. I watched from my porch, pretending to be busy scraping old paint off the railing. Half the neighborhood seemed to be doing their best not to look while absolutely looking. Curtains shifted. Lawnmowers paused. Even the retired couple next door stopped their crossword puzzle routine and stared over their fence like they were watching a parade. Darla finally emerged in a pair of clogs and a silk scarf that looked wildly out of place for someone being investigated. She tried to sound confident, but the investigator didn't even look up from his clipboard while she spoke. He pointed once, made her back up, and marked something down. When he left, she stood in her driveway for a long while, motionless. That afternoon, I got a call from a local reporter. "How'd you get my number?" I asked. "Public records," she said. "We're doing a piece on HOA overreach. We heard there was a utility tampering incident in your neighborhood." I agreed to speak off the record. During the interview, I mentioned the fabricated fine, the unilateral decision-making, and the lack of any proper vote. She asked if I had proof. I did. I had everything stored on a flash drive, the original forged letter, the bylaws, even a recording of the HOA meeting where board members denied any knowledge of the so-called emergency session. By the time I was done, she sounded stunned. "We've covered misuse of funds and unauthorized landscaping fines," she said, "but this sounds like criminal manipulation of infrastructure." "It was," I said. And she thought she'd get away with it because she wore pearls and spoke in italics. 2 days later, the article hit the front page of the local paper's website. The headline pulled no punches. HOA chairwoman under investigation for utility tampering and document forgery. Below it was a photo of Darla's house with a large caption that read, "Homeowner's water shut off over fake rule." The fallout was immediate. By lunchtime, several neighbors had gathered on my lawn, most of them people I'd barely spoken to before. A retired plumber named Greg said Darla had once fined him for replacing his mailbox without aesthetics committee approval. Another woman, Sylvia, brought out a folder of letters she'd received from Darla over the years, every one of them threatening some kind of penalty. One was for planting tomatoes too close to a shared property line. "Is that even a thing?" I asked, flipping through the stack. "No," said Caleb, who had shown up with coffee and a stack of city code printouts. Not unless her tomatoes were sentient and planning an insurrection. By sunset, a small group had formed what they jokingly called the HOA Survivors Club. But no one was laughing when a county sheriff's cruiser pulled up to Darla's house that evening. The deputy who stepped out wasn't the same one who'd come by the week prior. This one wore a holstered tablet and body cam and didn't bother with pleasantries. He knocked once, waited, then knocked again louder. Darla finally opened the door, her posture rigid. "We have a warrant to search the premises for records related to HOA documentation and correspondence," the deputy said. "You can't barge into my home," she snapped. "We're not," he said. "We're acting under an order from the county district court. If you refuse, you'll be in violation of a judicial mandate." She opened her mouth, then shut it again. The deputy stepped inside, followed by two officials from the county legal office. They were inside for nearly an hour. When they left, one of them carried a box filled with binders, folders, and what looked like a flash drive taped to the top. They didn't speak to anyone as they loaded up and drove off. The next morning, an emergency HOA meeting was posted on every mailbox in the neighborhood. This time, it wasn't Darla's doing. It was signed by 4 of the 5 board members, and the location had been moved from the community center to the high school auditorium. Apparently, they were expecting a crowd. I arrived early again, but the place was already packed. Word had spread, and not just within our subdivision. Residents from surrounding neighborhoods had come to listen, some holding printed copies of the newspaper article, others with their own stories of overbearing HOA boards. The board members sat at a long table on stage, looking more like defendants than leaders. The meeting opened with Linda, the former schoolteacher, clearing her throat and addressing the crowd. "We've reviewed the charter, all past minutes, and the county's initial findings," she said. Darla Henderson acted without board approval in nearly every enforcement action over the last year. She issued false fines, forged documentation, and accessed homeowner utility controls without any legal authority. A murmur rolled through the auditorium. "We've voted to permanently remove her from the board," Linda continued. Effective immediately. Applause erupted. People stood. Some clapped. A few simply nodded, but the sense of relief was palpable. Then she added, "And we've initiated a motion with the city to dissolve the current HOA structure and replace it with a voluntary neighborhood council. One that doesn't have punitive authority." That stopped the room cold. Then someone in the back shouted, "About time." More cheers. After the meeting, I was approached by a man in a dark brown blazer with a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as an investigator with the state's Attorney General's office. "We're building a case," he said, "and your documentation is key. You still have the originals?" "I do," I said. "And I made digital backups. Twice." He smiled faintly. "Good. We're looking at multiple felony counts: fraud, impersonation of a public official, and criminal interference with public utilities." I didn't say anything. "People like her don't think there are limits," he added. "They think bureaucracy is a wall they can hide behind. But you made it a window." I nodded, unsure what to say. The following week, Darla was officially indicted. She was booked and released on bond, but the charges were serious, and the DA wasn't pulling punches. The forged seal alone carried a possible 3-year sentence. The utility tampering? That was a separate count with its own weight. Her house went quiet. No more notes. No more surprise inspections. No more meetings where she held court like a dictator in garden clogs. Neighbors who'd once whispered compliance now spoke freely. Greg fixed his mailbox to look like a miniature fire truck. Sylvia planted tomatoes in 3 different spots just to prove a point. Someone even set up a community grill night on what used to be Darla's no gatherings after dusk lawn. As for me, I joined the new neighborhood council. Not because I wanted power, but because someone needed to make sure what happened didn't happen again. We held open meetings. We posted minutes online. We made decisions by vote, not decree. The neighborhood changed, slowly but deeply. And the fear that once hovered over every garden, mailbox, and porch light? It faded. Darla's trial was scheduled for later that year. I didn't plan on attending unless they needed me to testify. But I kept the flash drive. Just in case. Not as a trophy. As a warning. Because sometimes, all it takes to break a bully's grip is someone willing to read the rules and enforce the real ones. The first real rain of the season came down in sheets the morning Darla Henderson was arraigned. It washed the gutters clean and gave every front lawn the kind of shine you couldn't buy with a sprinkler system. A fitting backdrop, I thought, for the official end of her reign. I hadn't planned on going to the courthouse. But when Linda from the board called and said the judge had approved community attendance, I changed my mind. Not out of spite, though I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a certain satisfaction, but because I wanted to see it made real. A courtroom. A docket. A judge reading out charges. Caleb picked me up in his beat-up station wagon. He wore a navy blazer that didn't quite match his slacks and had a folder tucked under his arm like a badge of honor. "She's got a new lawyer," he said as we pulled onto the main road. "Some downtown firm. Expensive, but not miracle workers." I didn't ask how he knew. Caleb always knew. We arrived early and slipped into the second row of the public seating. The gallery slowly filled with others from the neighborhood. No signs, no noise, just quiet eyes and folded arms. Even Sylvia, who rarely left her house since her hip surgery, shuffled in with her cane and a look of pure intent. The bailiff called the case, and Darla stepped into the courtroom wearing a muted gray dress that looked several sizes too loose. Her lawyer walked beside her, whispering something she didn't seem to hear. She kept her eyes low until she reached the defense table, then finally looked up right at me. I held her gaze until she looked away. State of California versus Darla Jean Henderson, the clerk read, charged with 1 count of fraudulent misrepresentation of a governing body, 2 counts of document forgery, 1 count of criminal interference with public infrastructure, and 1 count of impersonating a municipal officer. Her lawyer entered a plea of not guilty. The judge nodded and set the trial date. It was procedural, textbook, but in the silence that followed, the weight of it settled over the room like a dropped curtain. No one clapped. No one cheered. We just watched her walk back out the same way she came in, smaller than she'd ever looked on our street. Outside, Caleb lit a cigarette under the overhang and handed me a copy of the judge's ruling. "She's lucky they didn't add wire fraud," he said. Apparently she used the HOA's mailing account to send that fake fine to a few other people too. If they'd sent it electronically, it would have been a federal issue. I read the list of charges again. "You think she'll do time?" He exhaled. "If the prosecutor pushes it, at least a year. Maybe more. Depends how many people testify." I looked back toward the courthouse. I'll be there. Back in the neighborhood, things had shifted in subtle but permanent ways. The new community council had set up a shared email thread where residents could weigh in on topics before meetings. Greg, the retired plumber, organized a volunteer landscaping crew for those who couldn't mow their own lawns. Sylvia donated a bench for the walking path with a small plaque that read, "Decisions made together, not forced alone." The old HOA signs were taken down, repainted, and rebranded with the new name, Maple Hollow Neighborhood Council. No more fines. No more threats. Just guidelines, suggestions, and collective decisions. And best of all, no more clipboards. One afternoon, I was going through my garage when I found the original forged notice. Darla had sent me, the one with the fake clause and the phony seal. I stared at it for a long moment, then tucked it back into the folder where it belonged. It wasn't a trophy. It was evidence. A reminder that power, once unchecked, can rot anything it touches. The trial started 3 weeks later. The prosecutor, a woman in her early 40s with a voice clear enough to cut glass, opened with a timeline of Darla's actions. She presented the fake fines, The unauthorized water shutoff and the altered meeting minutes, 3 separate criminal acts, each tied to a paper trail Darla had failed to cover. She didn't just overstep her authority, the prosecutor said. She invented authority where none existed, weaponized it, and used it to punish those who didn't conform to her personal version of order. One by one, neighbors took the stand. Greg testified about the threats he received for repairing his own fence. Sylvia explained how Darla demanded she remove her garden beds because they disrupted neighborhood uniformity. Linda, calm and deliberate, recounted how Darla routinely changed meeting minutes after the fact, erasing dissent and inserting fake votes. When it was my turn, I told the court what happened that morning. My water shut off. I described the technician's discovery, the forged fine, and Darla's own words how she claimed to have emergency powers granted by the HOA charter. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding. Her attorney used words like miscommunication, administrative confusion, and lack of clarity in leadership roles. But the evidence said otherwise. On the final day, the prosecutor projected a scanned copy of the forged enforcement letter onto the screen. She circled the clause number that didn't exist, the fake seal, and the signature Darla had signed not as herself, but as Director of Community Infrastructure. She made that title up, the prosecutor said. It appears nowhere in the charter. It doesn't exist in any municipal registry. She created it to give herself cover. That's not poor judgment. That's calculated fraud. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. On all counts. The sentencing came a week later. The judge, a tall man with a military posture and a voice like gravel, didn't embellish. Ms. Henderson, you abused the trust of your neighbors, falsified legal documents, and tampered with critical infrastructure. These are not the actions of a misguided volunteer. They are the actions of someone who believed they were untouchable. He sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, with an additional 2 years of supervised probation. She was also banned from serving on any housing or community board for a decade and ordered to pay restitution to the victims she fined. The courtroom didn't erupt. It didn't need to. Justice had a quiet dignity all its own. Afterward, as I walked out onto the courthouse steps, I noticed the sky had cleared. The rain had stopped, and the clouds peeled back to reveal a soft orange sun dipping low behind the trees. Caleb clapped me on the shoulder. You did good. I shook my head. We did good. He looked out at the line of neighbors filing down the steps behind us. Yeah, he said. We really did. That evening, I sat on my porch with a cold drink and watched kids ride their bikes down the street Darla used to patrol with the vigilance of a prison warden. Someone had painted a new welcome sign at the entrance of the neighborhood. It read, Maple Hollow, where we look out for each other. The house across from mine had new owners now. Young couple. Friendly. They waved when they saw me. No clipboard in sight. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like I lived in a neighborhood, not a fiefdom. I leaned back in my chair, took a long sip, and exhaled. Not because it was over, but because we'd won.